Welcome to Night Protest. It's Donald Jeffries coming to you from just outside the swamp infested Washington, D.C., as I do every Friday at this time from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern. Before we get started, I just want to thank everybody for all the condolences, all the kind wishes and words that people sent me for my sister and niece. Who, and for those of you who don't know, I lost my sister and my niece last week, 4 days apart. So hard time, but it goes on, and it's always great to hear from so many people and to know you care. So that really help me out. So I appreciate that. We have a return guest, somebody I've become very familiar with, and actually, we're gonna have RB Ham too. I see him here. Okay, we're adding to the stage here. Okay, there's so we have, and I'm with these guys a lot on Saturday nights on RB Ham's Beyond the Pale show. So I'm the host now. RBI is switching roles here, but Salim Mansour is just an incredible. Like I said, I would have loved, if I had not dropped out of community college, I had actually gone to college. I would love to have had him for a professor. He's very professorial, and so I think I could learn a lot from him. We all can. So I know as much about American history as anybody, but I'm not great on world history as great. So it's great to have somebody like Salim who can put these things and on a global perspective and talk about how it impacts the rest of the world, which I'm not great at doing. So always love his input. And then RB Ham we have, who has just joined us from the road, and he's still doing what they penalized him in Canada for doing. That's why he owes like $50,000 or something like that. This is part of the Canadian convoy. So great having you both here. Salim, so first start with you. We can, I want to talk about the Epstein files, and I think we're going to talk about that on RB Ham's show again tomorrow. I'm just writing an article for Substack. I'll probably publish it tomorrow, but just going through my great researcher, Peter Seekash, I've been a little distracted, so I haven't really looked at these before, but this is just amazing. It's just bombshell after bombshell and open talk of killing people and open talk of the Goyim, this very Jewish supremacist stuff on the part of Epstein and all the others. Really kind of shocking. What are your impressions of the Epstein files, Salim?
Well, I'm waiting to see. I mean, the latest chunk is only confirming what many have suspected and you have written about. I have referred to in some of my writing, how corrupt and deeply, what's the word for it? The iniquity, the appalling stories are all now being confirmed in some ways. But I'm waiting to see when there will be indictments. In Britain, in UK, those indictments aren't coming in, I believe. I mean, the first one has been the criminal investigation of Peter Mandelson, lately the British ambassador to Washington. He resigned from the House of Lords immediately as the trunk of the latest files were dropped. But there is not a sound from the Congress. There's not a sound from the DOJ of any one of these people being, indicted, called to answer, accountability. If it had been you, me, and John Doe, we would have become history very quickly.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. RB, it looked like you've got a kind of a posh studio on the road there. You look like you're in a studio. I know you're not.
Well, actually,
real, but
yeah, I'm in my truck. As you can see, I'm stopped at a truck stop in Davidson, Saskatchewan here to do the show. So it was a good timing that you started the show just on my way home with some empty trailers to drop off. And then I'm home for the weekend, but I got to leave Sunday night to deliver Monday morning in a couple places. So when the Super Bowl is starting, everybody's watching the Super Bowl, I'll be on the road driving. But yeah, I'm going to be doing the show, and I am going to be doing the show. I have you and Colleen Rowley booked for tomorrow night, and we were going to talk about this in the context of Wag the Zog. You remember the Hal Turner Diaries, how he talked about the Zionist occupied government.
Yeah,
and when people talked about things like that in those days, they were considered anti-Semitic hate mongers. and wild-eyed conspiracy theorists and stuff like that. And if you would have said the things that we now know about the Epstein files just a week ago, that it looks like the American government is definitely a wholly occupied Zionist organization. If you would have said the things that there are these Jewish supremacist Zionists who view the Gentile people as goyim and cattle to be used and to be tricked into doing their bidding, you would have been considered a crazy, wild-eyed conspiracy theorist. But now all these things are right out there in the open. This is how they do business, like Whitney Webb's books, One Nation Under Blackmail. There's no other way to look at it now. It's all out there in the open. And what's amazing is the mainstream media still not touching the Israel angle with a 40-foot pole. It's unbelievable. It's like they think the rest of us are just stupid. 80% of the population, I'm sure of it now, 80% of the population know that Israel basically owns the government and gets all Western governments, not just the United States. They've got tendrils here in Canada too. You can tell from the discourse amongst our conservative party set up here. Everything is for Israel. Iran is evil. Israel can do no wrong. And anything that the United States foreign policy is, as far as Venezuela is concerned, as far as Ukraine is concerned, it's all on board with the New World Order led by the Zionist-occupied government. And soon to be, America's going to be dried up and blown away, just as Bibi Netanyahu famously once said, once we're done with America, they can blow up and blow away because we will have our Pax Judaica in place. The AI superpower will be Israel, and they will own everything in the world as far as finances go. They'll be the money changers of the world. And it looks like that's the way it is. There's a famous lecture out there by Professor Zhang right now. Anybody can access it, where he lays out his theory of Pax Judaica. And if I would have watched something like watched this presentation, say even a year ago, I would have said, "Oh, that's a bit too far." But now it looks like it's all falling into place. I'm telling you. I mean, we're witnessing it in real time.
No, absolutely. There's no question about that. And it's what strikes me, as I mentioned to Salim, is that just looking through and I'm just beginning to look through. It's like I think they claim, and again, I don't. It's like the number 33. That 6 million figure comes over. There's supposedly 6 million documents. That's just mind-boggling. How can there be 6 million documents related to this guy? But if you look at it, there's something in there. There was a reference to him living at the Vatican at one point, Epstein, and another where he arranges a meeting with the Pope for somebody, and then somebody arranges a meeting with Putin. Who is this guy? He was a math teacher without a college degree.
Well, he was connected to the Chabad Lubavitch sect, and they're everywhere. Putin has his own rabbi, Chabad Lubavitch rabbi. The New World Order is here. It's led by Zionist Jews apparently. And if you think about the Catholic Church and the Pope that's in charge right now, remember he was a Jesuit, and the Jesuits are associated with Freemasonry. The Zionists are associated with Freemasonry. This whole Freemasonic power structure that's taken over the world has their tendrils in every religion. They use every religion for their own needs. Jewish people are probably the biggest victims of Zionists, actually, if you look at it. They're being thrown under the bus. There's two kinds of people in this world that equate the state of Israel with the entire religion of Judaism. And on the one hand, it's anti-Semite white supremacists, and the other hand, it's Zionist Zionist Jewish supremacists also want to equate that. It's almost like they want anti-Semitism, like they want to stoke it, because
that's the impression I'm getting. Salim, it looks to me like they're trying to provoke a reaction because this is so in your face. I mean, there's one quote where Epstein says the Goyim exist only to serve us. What? I mean, are they trying to get a response from us?
Well, I mean, this is nothing new, Don and RB. I mean, if one goes back into history, this is a 2,500-old history in which, the Jewish people, quote unquote, have paid the price of their hubris, their arrogance, and the mythology and legend as word of God. I mean, this entire thing is a constructed history fable. I mean, no modern Greek or Greeks in the Middle Ages believed that Homer's Iliad and Odyssey was sacred literature, and Ulysses was a prophet, and so on and so forth. But this is what this story from the Bronze Age has been written into the history of the West. And what is inseparable that became inseparable was in the early years after Jesus, when instead of the gospel having superseded, so to speak, the Old Testament, as Marcion said, the God of the Old Testament, this God full of vengeance, wrath, anger, envy, pride, is not the God, the Father that Jesus spoke about. But he was smuggled in by Paul and all of the theology that was constructed about the olive tree and the grafting of it and so on and so forth. We are back to Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And there it is, the understanding of Jesus's message of brotherhood, universality, love, mercy, compassion, and so on and so forth, based upon the fundamental golden rule, thou shalt not do to others what you would not have others do unto you, was all basically lost, because the gospel has to be read and understood through the lens of the Old Testament. And the Old Testament, the chosen people. I mean, does God have a chosen people? I mean, this
Yeah.
whole story is such bunkum. It has no universality. It is a particular story. God is not with a capital G, it is with a small g among other gods. And this God is a jealous God who's in making war against all the other gods. And so, whether it was the Greeks or whether it was the Romans, the Jews were the chosen people who looked down upon all these people and engaged in subversion and so on and so forth, to never, periodically cast aside. But then what we have is the post-Jesus story, 2,000 years old, and into the modern period, through the antiquity, the Middle Age, and then into the modern period, we find, and going deep into it would take up your entire 1 hour, but what we find is not only the rehabilitation of the people who Jesus called out in no uncertain term, what he meant by the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the synagogue of Satan. These are the people, or this is the theology of the people who has come to dominate both the Protestant church, and to the extent the Catholic Church remained at a distance after Reformation, but in the 20th century fell into the same hand and the same grasp.
Yeah.
This is the only people, I mean, if you're taking from the Middle East, the only people who have stood aside from this is Islam. Buddhism has got nothing to do with this. Zoroastrianism has got nothing to do with this. Confucianism has got nothing to do with it. Hinduism has got nothing to do with it. This is the story within the European context, the Mediterranean civilization, that then becomes global, which we have called the Eurocentric age, that becomes global. And to put it in a nutshell, I mean, the Jews have argued that they are not Christ's killer, at least in the modern period, that this is the basis of anti Semitism. So, this has been the quarrel or the conflict between Jerusalem and Rome. That's the famous book by Moses Hess. And to replace Rome, and the Jewish scholars and the Jewish philosophers has talked about it, whether they're secular or whether they are Torah lovers or whether they are Talmudic Jews, as Leo Strauss did in his writing about Jerusalem and Athens. So this is the conflict, despite the fact that in the gospel, Caiaphas, the chief of the Sanhedrin, says by tearing up his cloth, that Jesus had, apostatized, and he has to be put to death, and let it be upon our children, the whole problem into the ages. Well, by the Second Vatican, all of that was reversed. I mean, when you go into the Second Vatican and look at the way the reversal took place on the John the 23rd and the people involved in it, it is the storyline is okay. So you call us Christ killer, we will call you the makers of Holocaust. So there it is, one on one.
Yeah.
And so you can't talk about and question Holocaust, and so it becomes a taboo subject. Just as Christ killer has become a taboo subject, nobody wants to talk about it now.
Yeah.
And what it symbolizes.
Well, look what happened when Mel Gibson made his movie. I mean, it wasn't controversial. I mean, he just told it the way all Catholics learned it. And he just, and he, I mean, look, he had no funding from Hollywood. They tried to stop it, and he still made hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's why they hate him to this day. But you're right. Vatican II changed there. I was just a really small kid. I have very vague memories of the Latin Mass. But once they changed that, I didn't know. But I think you're right. I think the main change was then hey, you guys stopped saying that Jews killed Christ because Catholics, that's what they said before.
That's right. So, I mean, Vatican II is the transition. I mean, after all, the Catholic Church is the largest church in the world. It's not the Protestant sectarian churches. How many in number, I I don't know.
Yeah.
But the Protestants were bought over at the time of the Reformation. I mean, Luther bended over one side and then he bended back, when he realized the error that he was getting into. But John Calvin was totally sold to the Amsterdam money men, as was Cromwell. So yeah, and that comes down. But what is the remedy, Don? I mean, the remedy was the First Amendment in the sense that in the American Constitution, there is no reference to Christianity, though every single founding father was, in some sense, a deeply abiding Christian. We may talk about Jefferson as somebody who was not, and there might be others who were not. Thomas Paine was not, but most of them were. But there was no mention of Christianity. It was a mention of a creator, and religion would be left to the individual consciousness. It was not a state religion like Anglicanism in England after Henry VIII. So that was the remedy, that politics will stand apart from the faith of any individual. Nobody is going to be prosecuted, apostatized, and so on and so forth, even though the culture that the Pilgrim Fathers brought was fully tainted by the value system of what Calvin and others had preached. Calvin was a man who had put people to burn on the stake. I mean, the most famous example is of Michael Servetus, but that followed the Calvinists. The Puritans were basically Calvinists. They followed that into New England, the Plymouth Rock and so on. And you have that whole episode, the history for over a century and a half too, of burning witches on the stake and so on and so forth. The Scarlet Letter and the manner and they went along. But after the revolution of 1776, there was that period, at least the first 100 years, where America expanded and the Constitution was at play. But it broke down. It broke down with the Civil War and then after the Reconstruction. And the most important turning point, I mean, for me, Don and RB, as I go back and scratch my head over the history of the World War I, that is the turning point, much more than anything else. If you get into the granular to roughly, about World War One, about the people around Wilson and what happened. This is the sellout to the Zionists, total and complete, that began then incrementally. Today, you have the Epstein case, and there's not one. I mean, I leave aside Massey. There's not one who's standing up from the GOP or from the Democrat to say this is unacceptable. We have to bring these people to the books.
Yeah, exactly. RB, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, what I find most striking is so in this massive release of all these Epstein files, some things are redacted, some things aren't. But what is definitely redacted are the perpetrators of these crimes are redacted. Aside from the political people we already know and the names we already knew, the people that Epstein was dealing with and giving these women to the point where they're emailing back and forth about, oh, did you enjoy the torture video? Well, I'd like to know who he sent that video to.
Yeah.
But the name of the person who he sent that email to is redacted. Why don't we know who these perpetrators of these crimes are? This is what drives me crazy. Pam Bondi was caught on camera. James O'Keefe did a sting and got Pam Bondi caught on camera saying, "Yeah, we had tens of thousands of videos of these sex crimes going on, and we're redacting all of them. We're not letting anybody see them because then we'll know who the perpetrators of these crimes are." So you have to imagine the perpetrators of these crimes, the people who Epstein was involved with, are people on the highest level of the pyramid. They're right at the top. They're the people, the movers and shakers you never hear about, who always stay in the background. The people that are actually conducting the world's affairs in the name, in the name of their new world order plan that George Bush first, famously in 1984, said that we're going to do. And when this plan is successful, and it will be, there will be a new world order for the ages. And so you have to understand that this involves that whole AI thing, the whole total surveillance of everybody everywhere at all times is what they want, right? I forget which which national security advisor coined it. He said total dominant security or something like that. Like total awareness, total information awareness. That it is, TIA, total information awareness. That's what they want. They want to hold that over the people to control them. So this is all about power and control, and the people at the very top of this power and control system are the names that are being redacted, and that is how much power they have. They have so much power. They can tell the DOJ what to do. Think about that. There is when Pam Bondi famously said no one is above the law, she was lying, because the people who run her are above the law. That's what drives me crazy.
Well, I want to point out, RB and Don, you're right, but let us not, at least from my point of view, let us not make a fetish of technology. It is about human being, human thoughts, morality, culture, and so on. Technology doesn't make all of that. Technology, from the Bronze Age technology to where we have come, there is a constant evolution of technology, and therefore greater and greater control by the power holders over the people. So, technology is a given in that sense. When I say World War I, and if you start exploring it, you see, our memory is that of a gnat or a horsefly. So when we talk about New World Order, we're talking about, again, in a very narrow sense, that we're talking about World Economic Forum, we're talking about the Davos crowd, we're talking about Palantir, about Oracle and Larry, whatever his name is, Ellison, and so on and so forth, the George Soroses and the Zuckerbergs and others, Yeah, so that's true. That a greater surveillance, a greater control, a greater eruption of our privacy gone. Donald Trump has killed the First Amendment, killed the Second Amendment, killed the Fourth Amendment. I am a Canadian sitting over here. My ideal was America and the American Constitution. I grew up reading Thomas Paine. the reason of man that he was writing about was, in a sense, my own understanding of my own culture and freedom, which is lacking, and therefore the modernization has to take place, you know. But modernization did not mean that we become the tool of technology. So back to it, you know, World War One. What happened in World War One? Just think about it. You know, we have 100-year perspective now. The same week, the very same week that Balfour Declaration was written and passed, November 2nd, 1917, if I have my dates right, the same week was the eruption of the Bolshevik Revolution in Petrograd, St. Petersburg. It's the same week, you know. So on the one side, you have the Jews, revolutionary Zionists, and then on the other side, you have Jews, revolutionary Bolshevik.
Hmm.
The revolutionary Zionists from Herzl and before Herzl, the people who mentored Herzl, are coming down from the top. They have penetrated the governments of the Western powers. They are the dark shadows. You want to go back to it? The Illuminati, the Freemason. The name that comes out is Weishaupt, 1787, his documents, the French Revolution. All right. So they are from the top and they are manipulating the so-called elected leaders that they have put in office. From the bottom is the mob who is being driven by sloganeering that moves the passions of the mob without any thinking. The mob is a herd of buffaloes or whatever, destructive. You know, the references can be talked about in terms of the great books that were written about the mob. You know, Ortega y Gasset, the Spanish philosopher, writing about the masses, the revolt of the masses. You know, Elias Canetti, the Nobel Prize winning Bulgarian, talking about power and crowd, that is the mob. So you get the mob activated on the basis of envy, on the basis of, you know, desires and aspiration that have been muted, you know. So liberty, fraternity, equality, all of these sound wonderful, and the mob comes out with pitchfork. And so there it was, on the one side, the threatening forces of Bolshevism, and on the other side, the manipulation from the top. So you come to Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is immediately surrounded in office by three most powerful Jewish personalities. Who are they? Louis Brandeis, who Wilson appoints to the Supreme Court as justice. Rabbi Stephen Weiss, who the leader of the Jews born in Budapest, come to America, who is going to be the Zionist voice. And then Bernard Baruch, the multi-millionaire in from New York Stock Exchange, who is going to run basically the government from behind. These three men of Wilson all the way into the 4 terms of Franklin Roosevelt. The man who manipulates all of this thing in the Wilson government is Colonel House. No colonel, you know,
Yes.
a civilian who
Yes.
made his career in Texas as a backroom manipulator for the Democratic Party and brought his skill to Washington and got Woodrow Wilson elected. And then everything that Woodrow Wilson does is done on the command of Colonel House, who is running Bernard Baruch, Stephen Weiss, and Louis Brandeis, you know. And so there it is. They run him for a second term by saying, America will not go to war. I am not going to be elected to go to war in the 1916 campaign. He's inaugurated in 4th of March, 4th, 5th of March, 1917, when those days the inauguration would take place in March. So he gets inaugurated in March. Within 4 weeks, he turns around and asks the Congress to declare war on Germany. The casus belli of the war is 2 years old. That was the sinking of Lusitania, because there's nothing happened in the period between his inauguration and the announcement, or between the election of 1916 November and his inauguration in March 1917. So all of this is played out. You run the election, they're not going to go to war. You are in war soon after your inauguration. Same thing happens with Franklin Roosevelt. So who are these people? What is their agenda? And their agenda is the world government. That's the new world order. In the case of Woodrow Wilson, he could not get his agenda through the Congress because the Congress was still attached to the principle of the Constitution. And so the League of Nations was voted out in the Senate, didn't get the 2/3 majority. But that was not the case in 1945. So it is the Illuminati, which in fact is ultimately the Zionists on the top, the Bolshevik at the bottom, working coordinately to create the New World Order. What is the New World Order? Destroy nationhoods, smash up nationhoods. And when you smash up nationhood, you will effectively have a global elite, an international elite, that is the international Jewry, that will run the show.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly, Salim, I've done some research and I've traced the Chabad Lubavitch cult. It does touch Putin somehow. There's a huge Russian population of emigres in Israel, of course. So there's a lot of connections there. A lot of Russian oligarchs have were connected to Epstein, but I can't find the connection to China, and that's where I want some. There's something funny about this whole thing about this New World Order stuff. Where does China fit in? Do you have any understanding of that?
Well, China doesn't fit in. I just now said to you, I expressed it, that this whole business of anti-Semitism, Zionism, Bolshevism is played out first in Europe. It is European Jews. So you now want to get into the background, the ethnic, linguistic background of European Jews. You find, it is not one homogeneous crowd of people. There are Ashkenazi, there are Khazarians, there are Mizrahi, and so on and so forth. The Russian Jews, that is the Jews of Eastern Europe, are not Israelites. They're not Semitic. They are Talmudic Jews. They're Khazars. In America, in this phase that we're talking about, beginning with Woodrow Wilson's government, the backstory is the immigration from Eastern Europe. The critical immigration that takes place between 1880 and 1910, before the World War I, the last phase of it, 1900, 1910, 1 million, excess of 1 million Eastern European Jews arrived in America. They were Khazarians. They were the ones who were brought into politics, into the Democratic Party. The man responsible for that is Louis Brandeis, who was made, the key person to deal with the new immigrants. The Democratic Party's whole strategy that was worked out by Colonel House, he wrote about this in his book, by the way. It is very interesting. His book that he wrote, like a novel, but it was a manifesto of his strategy. It's called Philip Prue, the Administrator.
Yeah.
Philip Prue is basically Colonel House, according to Colonel House's biographer, Anthony Howden. So what is Philip Prue doing? He's putting together the package on the basis of new immigrants to monopolize power. He tries it out in Texas with the Hispanics, and then he comes to Washington and then he implements that strategy with the newly arrived Jews from Eastern Europe, recruit them into the Democratic Party. And the player who does that are Rabbi Stephen Weiss and Louis Brandeis. Stephen Weiss is the demagogue out in the street talking about Zionism and the persecution by the Russian Tsar and the nobility of the Jews and the pogroms and so on and so forth. And, that's the storyline from Herzl, that the suffering people, the Jews, with the anti Semitism, give them a piece of land, they will go away there, and it will solve the problem both for the Jews and for the European. The European will be rid of the Jews, and therefore there will be no question of, Semites and anti Semitism in Europe. And the Jews will become free and emancipated because, they won't have to suffer the consequences of this bigoted racist ideology of anti-Semitism. But all of these are constructed ideology because people like Benjamin Disraeli and others are totally opposed to it. That is, the Central European Jews and the Jews of already emancipated countries like France and Britain and the Netherlands, who form the largest body of immigrants in America. The Central European Jews, Louis Brandeis was from Central Europe. His parents had come from Bohemia, Prague. So they were already emancipated. Emancipation had touched them. It is the Eastern European Jews who were in the ghettos, and they wanted to remain in the ghetto because that was the power of the rabbis. So, that is the dynamics at play over here. And in the period between the Second World War, First World War and Second World War, the European Jews, I mean, if you read people like Elmer Berger, Rabbi Elmer Berger, they're dead set against the Zionists, against this whole idea of a separate nation, because they have assimilated into the modern world. Assimilation means, getting out of the ghettos. But there are people who want to be in the ghetto or recreate the ghetto. And Zionism, looking for a state in Palestine, is to recreate the ghetto. Because the British did offer Herzl Uganda, that was voted down by the East European Jews in their annual Congress at Basel in
Yeah.
1897.
I
So
also heard that Madagascar was also
So if you grasp that side of the history, all of the other side is not involved in any of these things. They are not involved. It is. I mean, Lord Balfour is a Tory, is a conservative. He wakes up thinking he is going to be a sort of modern day Moses in establishing Palestine. Same thing with Lloyd George. Same thing with, Winston Churchill. These are all the people who have this magnificent idea that they're going to play out the myths and legends of the Old Testament in their own time. And then if you go into World War One and examine World War One, the prime minister, the first 2 years, the British prime minister in the first 2 years of World War One was Asquith, Herbert Asquith, when the war began. And his Secretary for Foreign Affairs was Lord Grey. And then what happens? It is Colonel Hulse and Stephen Weiss and their, correspondence with Lord Grey turns Lord Grey from being a devoted empire loyalist into becoming, a man who is now going to work for Palestine, for the Jews. All of these people support, and that's the internal parliamentary coup that takes place at the end of 1916 when Asquith government falls and Lloyd George, the liberal, takes power. And who he's surrounded by? Balfour, Winston Churchill, and others. The only Jew in the cabinet, the war cabinet, Edwin Montagu, is dead set against the idea of Balfour, because they know, the assimilated Jews know, that it is going to backfire on them, because the question will be of dual loyalty.
Yeah.
This was pointed out by Benjamin Disraeli in his writings.
Okay, all right. I wanted to bring this up, Don. So we have we have to talk, of course, when we're talking about this. Is what happened to the Jewish people in World War II when Hitler and Himmler take power? And there is undoubtedly a Holocaust. They round up Jews and they put them in concentration camps. When they invade Poland, they use the IBM holograph system to go around and take a census. And when they find out where all the Jews are, they round them up and send them off because they have this misguided idea that all the Jews are against them. When it's not actually all the Jews, it's mostly it's some high placed Zionist Jews, but mostly the people that are pushing this idea are what Salim is talking about. These are aristocratic British gentlemen with this great idea, and they're more anti-Semitic than anybody else because their feeling is, well, we can get rid of anti-Semitism by giving them their own homeland, and all the Jews can go there, and there won't be any anti-Semitism anymore because we won't have them anymore. I mean, it just seems like Salim said, it's bound to backfire because the idea of a chosen people is also the idea of a master race. And so this dichotomy, this thesis and antithesis, the thing that strikes back like a boomerang, is this crazy idea that these Nazis have that they're the master race and everybody else is Untermenschen, and all these ideas they take from the Old Testament because that's what happens when Moses leads his people to the promised land. He dies, but Jacob under him goes off and exterminates the people there in a mass Holocaust of its own to claim the chosen land. It's not like it's just sitting there waiting for them to be taken. They have to wipe out everybody. That's where the whole idea of Amalek and all that comes in.
Well, I think it's, it's amazing because everything, and again, I talk about Hitler all the time. I don't think we can rationally talk about Hitler because he's been all our foreign hobgoblins are demonized, but Hitler's in a class of his own. Hitler, I mean, most people don't look at him as human. So it's impossible really to analyze. He had powerful people backing him originally, and he almost certainly went to Argentina, and he didn't kill himself and lived there for a long time. So I think but the problem is, if you look at modern Israel today, Israel was created Israel, whatever support Israel has is because of evangelical Christians that think they're the chosen people, but also people that feel that they are the perpetual victims of the world because of the Holocaust. And they look at it, even if, and again, we can talk about the numbers of the Holocaust, and really it's impossible. The numbers are impossible. They're ridiculous and contradictory, but we're lied to about everything. But I love where Candace Owens and Mel Gibson, Mel Gibson, his father, I used to correspond with his father, Hutton Gibson. He was the most renowned Catholic scholar I've ever seen. This guy, he knew, and he was, unreformed Catholic. He didn't recognize Vatican II. And he talked about the Jews and Freemasons all the time. But this, Mel Gibson, when his father was attacked, when he made the movie about Christ, and they said, your father's a Holocaust denier, he's all this stuff, and Mel Gibson said, my father never lied to me. He stayed true, and he said, well, what about these? He says, millions of people died in World War II. Some of them were Jews. And I think that's a brilliant answer because you have the Holocaust that happened. I mean, why is that Holocaust with a capital H the only one? Candace Owens, who is amazing, some of the stuff she says now. She points out all the more millions. If you believe these official figures, I don't know if any of them are real or what they are, but I don't know how many. But they're more than 6 million Catholics were killed. Lots of priests, lots of nuns for the Bolsheviks. That happened. And why isn't that a Holocaust? Why can't I, as a Catholic, can I get victimhood points for that? Of course not. Only Jews can. And it's ridiculous. And at some point, I think people now are saying enough is enough, because then if somebody complains too much about what they're doing to the Palestinians, they'll say, oh, you want another Holocaust? You understand, if you can't kill Palestinians, there's going to be. So I think we need to be honest about, and I like the fact that everything is being talked about now. All this is being talked about. And, Candace Owens, if you watch her show, she was talking about Jewish ritual murder the other day. This subject that was the dark corners of extremism. Nobody could talk about it. But this was something that Europe especially believed of the Jews for a long time. They believed that they killed children and drank their blood or something. I don't know. Maybe the vampire legends may come from that. I don't know. But now, Candace Owens is talking about it openly. So I think we need to discuss these things because Salim is right about World War One. That was a huge step we took because World War One, nobody, the court historians, they can't come up with any. Why did however many millions of people died in World War One? What did they die for? Well, I don't know. And the result of it, what was the result of it? They, for the first time in history, the loser or the winners enacted reparations on the loser. So most people don't realize Germany did not stop paying World War One reparations until 2010. That's incredible. So they bled them dry with that, and they took lots of land that was formerly Germany's. And so when Hitler first started, until he kept stepping and stepping, but his original argument, I think, is that okay, I'm going in, I'm taking this. This was from the Treaty of Versailles, which took this from us. And so he was welcomed originally. So but why? Why was that allowed to happen? There was a book called Hitler Born at Versailles, where they told, the Treaty of Versailles, the way it happened afterwards, they ensured there was going to be a World War II. And that's what they wanted. And after World War II, because Hitler was a Zionist. Hitler wanted to have things, which is ironic. But all that happened after World War II.
Because it is kind of amazing because, I just wanted to mention this. Before World War One, Germany was the most advanced nation on earth, artistically, creatively, technologically. Jews were welcome there. They weren't second-class citizens. They served in the army in World War One. Something like 80,000 Jews served in the German army during World War One, and there might have been a small strain of some anti-Semitism boiling underneath, but it was mainly in other countries. Germany was like, it was the most cultured country on earth. How they turned into this barbaric cult by the 1930s is because of the Treaty of Versailles. They were stabbed in the back by their ruling class. And you're right, it was almost ensured to turn Germany into a basket case nation, to destroy their culture. And then what happens? Of course, you get the right-wing backlash from the brown shirts in the street because they're casting votes for something to blame. And here comes this guy named Hitler with all these grand ideas. And people don't understand, Hitler didn't come up with these ideas on his own. It was the Thule Society that groomed him to be who he was. And the Thule Society are another bunch of Zionist Freemasons. In 1933, remember, they had the Havana Agreement, where Zionists and Nazis got together and had this grand idea of sending all the German Jews to Palestine. And so people don't understand this history, that this whole idea of creating Israel in the first place is not just some kind of Jewish idea. It involves more than just Jewish people. I like Kurt Metzger, who appears on the Jimmy Dore show a lot. He talks about this. That's how they want you to talk about the Jews and this and that, so they can easily get back at you. Why do you hate Jews? Why do you hate Jews so much? It's not Jews we hate. It's the Zionist supremacists that control the discourse, and that's what we got to start thinking about, because Salim said, the most dangerous people are the Christian Zionists, the ones that follow the people that follow John Hagee and the section of the Schofield version of the Bible that says the Jews are the chosen people. They all Jews in the world have to return to Israel before we can have the second coming of Christ. So we can have this grand war. It's total insanity. It's total religious insanity what they believe in. But there's so many of them, and they believe it wholeheartedly, and they back what's going on right now and the genocide of the Palestinians, because they believe it's going to recreate the conditions in prophecy, so we can have this grand Armageddon, and after that, Jesus will return and we'll have 1,000 years of peace. It almost sounds like Hitler was talking about. Remember his idea of 1,000 years of peace? It's crazy, but that's where we are right now. What do you think, Salim?
Crazy. If it's not crazy, RB, when you connect the dots. I mean, I would tell my students, our ancestors um, were the people who taught us how to connect the dot. If we study them, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Arabs, the ancient Africans, they looked at the stars, and they drew patterns, and out of the patterns they found the way to go from point A to point B, navigate the oceans, the seas, the desert sands, and we have forgotten to draw the connection, that is, draw the dots. Once we draw the dots, we can see the pattern. Hitler's und Übermenschen, the superior race, is taken right out of the Old Testament. The master
Yep.
race, the chosen people,
Yeah.
and the Goyim and the Gentiles are the Untermenschen, right out of the Old Testament, So 1,000-year Reich, that is the millennia of the Third Reich, right out of the Old Testament, So there is, as you, I mean, I use the word "you" not in particular sense, in a general sense. That's my weakness of the English language.
No, that's fine.
We don't want to address this because our predisposition, and I'm talking about North America, European, but now it is particularly North America, much more so. Our predisposition, the famous book by Northrop Frye, the great Canadian scholar, philosopher, literary critic, and so on, is the Great Code. The Great Code is the biblical code that is right in our DNA. That's what he was talking about, in our speech, in the way we think, in our allegories, in our fable. It all goes back to the Old Testament, not the New Testament. That's the Great Code. And so in our subconscious, this is embedded, and unless we deal with our predisposition openly, and that's where it comes, I am so devoted to the concept of the American Constitution in its pristine sense. The remedy is there, which is what Don is talking about. If we can all talk about it, if Owen Candace can talk about it freely without the threat hanging over her head, or Tucker Carlson. I mean, the Tucker Carlson conversation with John Mearsheimer on the Middle East was an eye-opening for Tucker Carlson, his 2-hour conversation. I would spend a year talking about global politics with focus on the Middle East for about 5 or 6 lectures. And that would be the way to open up the eyes of my students, open up in the sense, give them things to think about. And some did. So unless we, really start going into the records, connecting the dots, we will live with our predisposition. So it is very easy for 435 members of the Congress with Mike Johnson. We can call him whatever name you call, but he believes in those things, in his dreams, in his sleep. He and Ted Cruz and the whole lot of them, they haven't examined the predisposition, and they won't examine it unless the people hold them responsible for their acts. That means the people with their
Well, Salim, they're paid very well not to examine their predispositions.
What's that?
Right? They're paid very well not to examine their predispositions.
And you see, the next step is we are a representative government, at least, the democracy, the advanced democracy. So America is a representative government in a republican form. Britain is a representative government in a parliamentary form. So it ultimately falls on the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States begins from. We the people. But if the people, by design and by training and by education, has been dumbed down to the extent they have been dumbed down, where then is the remedy? There is no remedy. What will be is anarchy, chaos. And in anarchy, chaos, it is the Zionists, it is the Bolshevik that will prevail because they are organized.
Yeah, there is that one Epstein email between Epstein and Ehud Barak, and they're talking about how chaos is good for them, and because when they've got global chaos, they can make a lot of money out of it, right? And they openly talk about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, order out of chaos has been the mantra for the establishment for a long time. But everything we're talking about, and I'm just always impressed with Salim's.
How many books have you read, Salim? Jesus
Yeah,
Christ!
it's amazing.
excuse my blasphemy, but I mean, I've read a lot of books in my life, but I've some of these books you've talked about, I've never heard about.
His knowledge is so vast, but what we're looking at is here. Everybody listening to watching this show has some knowledge of history. But most Americans, I don't. It's probably that way of the rest of the world too. Are historically illiterate. They know nothing of history.
Yeah.
So the average American, I talked about this in my books. The American, they know almost about the founding of this country. They know who George Washington is. They remember the names, but they think they're all dead racist. And basically now is that, well, blacks were 2/3 of a human being, and basically they had slaves and they dismiss it as that. They love Abraham Lincoln, who I think is our greatest tyrant ever, and they think the Civil War was a good thing. Again, almost 1 million people died. 1/4 of the South was gone, and the consent of the governed was completely scattered. Most Americans don't know what the consent of the governed was. That was a revolutionary concept, that people have a right to choose who rules them. That we don't have to consent to you. If we don't like you, Jefferson said, we can alter or abolish it. The average American thinks that's treason now. They don't know history. They don't know what happened as a result of the Civil War, that after the Civil War, the United States was no longer, it was originally, the United States was a plural. The United States are became the United States is, because the state's power was completely killed. By the time World War I came along, we're going into globalists, and so we're ignoring John Quincy Adams. America doesn't go abroad in search of foreign monsters to destroy. George Washington's farewell address, where he talked about no entangling alliances, isolationist. We jumped right into that, and that's been our foreign policy ever since. I pointed out in American Memory Hole, thanks to Peter Seacott, did some great research. Sagnelli, who's the world's greatest George Mason expert, he said those words came from George Mason. Don, exactly. I love George Mason more, and having met Vince, who knows more about him than anybody. But after that, this became accepted. This is our foreign policy now. If you object to it, if you talk like George Washington or John Quincy Adams or George Mason, those guys did, then you're an isolationist and you're struck down. And that's what they actually called Trump, or just for saying, hey, maybe we got to bring these troops home and these senseless wars. And now look at him; he's the biggest interventionist we've ever seen. It's no accident that court historians, the greatest presidents in American history, are the biggest warmongers. Abraham Lincoln, FDR, Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt. These are the guys that loved war. Although, with the exception of Teddy Roosevelt, they never served themselves. They always, conveniently, they were chicken hawks. But the peaceniks are the ones they don't like, JFK, like that. And we have to accept the fact that we love war, and it's hard to get Americans to understand their history. What we're talking about would go over their head. They would not have any concept of this at all. They study Mick history. So World War II to them is the Holocaust. That they don't know anything else. Oh, the Holocaust. Yeah, that's it's become that, just like it's the Civil War, slavery. That's it.
Well, 90% of Americans have no idea that the World War II wasn't won by the collective West. If it wasn't for the Russians' sacrifice on the Eastern Front, Hitler would have had no problem consolidating power. He went a step too far, being stupid and attacking the Russians. Napoleon's example should have given him pause, but I guess not. So the finest war machine ever created destroyed itself, crashing against the Red Army, which it's just amazing to me how people keep thinking this way, that war can solve the problems, and it never does. I mean, look what's going on in Ukraine right now. Amazingly, last year, the Ukrainians got the great idea of an offensive in the Kursk region. Well, in 1943, the Germans had a great idea of an offensive in the Kursk region, and it was the end. It was the beginning of the end of their downfall. And last year, the Ukrainians decided a great offensive in the Kursk region was going to be a great victory. And they lasted 3 months, and they were out of there, and now they're on the brink of collapse. Americans don't know nothing what's going on. Actually, right now, the best thing that could happen almost is that the best thing that could happen is that these Epstein files come out and more people are waking up. I think there's going to be an awakening to this, that it's time for the United States of America to take a different tack. We're on keeping on with this idea of interventionist policies is destroying the country, not just externally but internally, and it's sad to see because as Colleen Rowley says, once you go overseas and do all these things, it always eventually comes back to haunt you at home. And with the ICE raids going on and the masked jackbooted thugs in the streets now cracking American citizens' skulls, it's happening right now. And all those concentration camps they're building to intern the undocumented workers are eventually going to be used to inter the dissidents who are against American imperialism, because that's what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, there are so many things that issues that play, Don, in our.
Sorry.
But one of the problems that we are faced with, that is, the American people are not alone in this matter. It is global. We are faced with populism. Populism is, if you go all the way back to Aristotle, the worst form of government, it is tyranny, it's anarchy, and so on and so forth. The American Constitution was designed, I would suggest or indicate, was designed by the founding fathers to nip at the bud any populist effort. That's the way it was constructed, that it would not be a populist vote to elect the president. It would go through an electoral college. It would not be a populist assembly, a representative, because they would have to go to the people every 2 years, and so on and so forth. So there was a check, and of course the judiciary. But what has happened with the development of technology, that the American Constitution exists, but its effects are completely contrary to what the founding fathers imagined. That is, populism has taken over. Let's talk a little bit about ICE and what is happening with Trump administration, and what populism has done to the Constitution. The MAGA movement, or the Republican Party, was seen to be, at least that's how Donald Trump presented himself in 2015. He took over the mantle of Pat Buchanan, the Reform Party, but he remained within the GOP. The mantle of Pat Buchanan was to restore the constitutional government. He's the guy who talked about the Congress being the occupied territory, that there are two occupied territory. One is the Congress, the other is Palestine. And to liberate one, you have to liberate the other. So it was against populism. It was to restore the Constitution. That's what Trump talked about in 2015, 2016. And I keep making my mea culpa, that I, who should have been aware of this, fell into the trap, because I saw Trump as an individual, not in any way tainted by any elected office, a billionaire. And so he would be able to maneuver around all the various impediments to restore America, not to a man who can stand in Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and nobody would touch him, but he would restore the Bill of Rights, restore the constitutional government, restore accountability, and so on and so forth. So here you have it. We are now talking within the decade. We're not going far enough back, to search our memory. We stood, that is, the American people who voted for Trump, who were the MAGA movement, were supporting the First Amendment. The Tea Party movement. We're supporting the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the Fourth Amendment, no intrusion into your private life without a proper warrant, etc., etc. So this was the MAGA movement. This is what they stood for, right? And these were the sacred issue, quite properly. And then what happens? In the second term of this man, First Amendment has been put to the trash can, because everything can be turned into a hate speech, and you can be pursued on that matter. TikTok was taken away, and so on and so forth. Well, everybody thought that a MAGA movement, that the Second Amendment cannot be tampered with. And so we had the incident in 2020 when the MAGA movement was fully behind that young boy. What his name was? Kyle Rittenhouse.
Oh, Rittenhouse, yeah.
Yeah, walking with the gun in Wisconsin, and there was a shootout, and he was arrested, and he was put to trial, and he was acquitted on the basis of Second Amendment, right? But here we have ICE now. The MAGA movement did not move on the First Amendment. Now the MAGA movement has trashed the Second Amendment also, and has trashed the Fourth Amendment also. So populism is where we are. There is no attachment to anything. There is no guardrail to anything. It is this leader, Donald Trump, the demagogue can sway his base anyway. There's no response in that sense to the Epstein files, I mean, one would have thought that by now there would be a stampede of the GOP representative in the Congress coming out to demand accountability, to save their own skin in November. But no, they're all walking because they can see that they can play with this populist agenda with the people. And what is the remedy for that?
Well, I think you're right, Salim. But I think that the Epstein files, which we'll get back to, I guess, it revolves around, again, Trump is in the center of that, because in Trump's only reaction to it the other day, Caitlin Collins, of all people, a CNN reporter, actually questioned him aggressively about something that mattered about, and he basically got angry and said, "Why don't you smile?" It's his typical stupid stuff, and said that this Epstein. I think the people are sick of Epstein. It needs to go away, or something like that. It's like, what are you talking about? Again, he's acting. That's why I think how much of this is scripted. He's acting like he's guilty. His name is being mentioned everywhere. And as I said, one thing I've noticed in the Epstein files is how often Trump's name is not redacted. All the other, his name, it gets through. There's lots of accusations where Trump is mentioned. Not with Bill Clinton or Gates or any of these other guys. You did have Robin Leach. I don't know if you saw that on RB, where Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, who was accused of strangling a girl to death at one of these parties. I mean, these are the most horrendous crimes imaginable, and the people want to be outraged, but they're desensitized. And I think Kash Patel and the FBI has already said, well, we're not looking to prosecute anybody, so it doesn't matter what we discover here. But I think everything lies around. The Republicans don't want to act, like you said, because they know Trump's in there, and they don't want to make a big deal out of this because they don't want to act, publicize anything he did. Or George H.W. Bush is in there in terms of being with young boys. There's several strong accusations against George Bush the elder. So and again, his name wasn't redacted, but I'm sure there were some accusations against Bill Clinton. Apparently that was redacted. I don't know. I don't know what this is about, but it looks to me like it's to try to get Trump in the center of it. That's why the Democrats, for the first time ever, they're pushing this. We need to, Hillary Clinton wants to be, open testimony. I mean, what is going on here?
There are pictures of Bill Clinton in the Epstein files. Lots of pictures of Bill Clinton with hanging out with very young girls. I don't know how they're going to get around that. Bill Gates is mentioned. Elon Musk is mentioned. But the names that are redacted is I don't care about the victims. I redact the victims, sure, but the perpetrators, like I said before, the people that Epstein is corresponding with, the people who he's talking about of torture videos and all that stuff, their names are redacted. And so that's what I'm getting at. We obviously have a compromised Department of Justice. We have a compromised FBI, compromised CIA, because everybody knows the CIA, Mossad, MI6, all the Western intelligence services were availing themselves of Epstein's services. Epstein was even talking about how to carve up what remains of Libya after we overthrow Libya. He was actually talking about what to do in Ukraine with Zelensky and buying up Ukrainian assets after the inevitable war they knew was coming. That they wanted to go in there and privatize all the services in Ukraine. They were thinking about this before the war even started. Unbelievable how many people he was involved with. The breadth of the scheme is unbelievable, and so all the people that all these movers and shakers that hide in the shadows are having their names redacted because they're the ones that are, they're the ones that have most to lose, and they're the ones that are controlling the strings of the marionettes, which are the politicians. And so I don't know how I really don't know how this can go on without complete collapse of any trust in any institution. This could lead to a complete collapse of the system, and that can be either one, a good thing, or two, a bad thing, depending on who takes over, and who is in charge of the backlash. I saw J.D. Vance was interviewed by Megyn Kelly the other day, and he was talking about a new world order. So they're all talking about a new world order now. J.D. Vance is talking about it. Mark Carney's talking about it. So a new world order is coming. What form it takes, we can only think. We can only speculate. But the whole Anglo-American empire, the thing that's been propping it up is all collapsing in real time. We're seeing it before our very eyes. And I think, Salim, would be good. What's going to take over? We talked about it on our show last time, that it's going to be the global south and China, which seems to be unstained by this. You don't see Xi Jinping's name mentioned in the Epstein files. Could it be that everything's setting up for the global south, led by China and their relationships with all these countries through peaceful trade means, through trading instead of war? Could that be what takes over? What seems to be an absolute collapse of the Anglo-American empire, the whole Eurocentric system?
Well, Melania is there too. I mean, we haven't mentioned her at all.
Well, we do know that Melania was found by Jean-Luc Brunel in Slovakia and brought to Paris and trained to be a model. And she was first had an affair with Epstein before Epstein introduced her to Trump. So Trump got Epstein's sloppy seconds, and we're supposed to all go run to Melania's movie and fawn all over.
Brunel later killed himself under strange circumstances too.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if the judiciary in New York do listen to the case, I mean, Melania tried to stop everybody from talking about her by that $1 billion lawsuit against Michael Wolff. It was Hunter Biden who brought this out into the public, and she said that she's going to sue everybody, and then she sued Michael Wolff. And her lawyers did not anticipate that Michael Wolff would countersue using the anti-SLAPP legislation in New York. Now, if the court do bring the case to a hearing, Melania is bound to be subpoenaed and be a witness, and she will have to, under oath, testify to all the various questions that will be asked of her. But here is the interesting thing. I mean, now, if any of you remember from 4 years ago, or during the first term of Donald Trump, when the Epstein file were being talked about and pictures, few of the pictures had come out, but among the pictures that had come out was that of the Chief Justice, John Roberts. Do you all remember that in Epstein Island?
Yeah.
And the story about John Roberts and his two kids who were, I believe, adopted, and the connection and where they came from. So if the judiciary is also tainted, if behind that story it is true that it turns out to be true that Chief Justice John Roberts is also, stained by all that happened with Epstein, then you can see the entire government has been, brought down in a sense. Whether it happens or not is another matter, but the entire government is corrupt, bankrupt, and so on and so forth. And it reminds me, again, back to where truth is even more strange than fiction. Truth is stranger than fiction. Reminds me of Benjamin Disraeli's novels. One of them, Coningsby. And the storyline of Coningsby is, again, the main character um, goes around Europe of mid 19th century, a Jew from the upper class and nobility, as is. So it is a autobiographical character of Disraeli, and visits every capital in Europe. From Lisbon, Madrid, Paris, Budapest, Vienna, St. Petersburg, and he goes visiting these places, and meeting the royalties, and wherever he goes in and meets the royalties, behind the royalties are the the non-Irish, in extremely important position. So the story is casting and saying this international Jewry's presence, they are an individual, whether they are Russian Jews or German Jews or Portuguese Jews, but behind the curtain, they are the nation of the chosen people, and they have their own agenda. And that is the agenda that comes into play through the second half of the 19th century, and of course takes over in the 20th century. And America now is the hammer in the hand of this destructive force of Talmudic Jews.
Absolutely.
Well, that's that's another book I have. I did not know that Benjamin Disraeli wrote novels. That's the first time I've heard that. Thanks, Lee. We should have a book club so I can get up to speed with this.
No, but these are things that great classic books or important books, novels, are basically the mirror held up to the society. Every piece of Shakespeare's plays is a mirror, so we're talking about lawyers. I mean, again, the non-Irish have a whole plethora of lawyers in every position. They are lawyers who are defending the defendants. They are lawyers who are with the plaintiff on both sides of the issue. So there you have Merchant of Venice, the classic story. Nothing can be better than that. Shylock has, Antonio in a complete bind. The contract is written, and if you fail to deliver your borrowed money on time, then you have to give your pound of flesh, and he has it ironclad. And he is cheering Portia. He doesn't see Portia, who she is, in the courtroom, that, this mighty Solomon has arrived. Justice has to be done, because Portia agrees with him. You, Antonio, you have, signed the contract, and Shylock has the right to your pound of flesh. And Shylock is not going to give up his pound of flesh. He's ready to take it. And Portia says, go ahead. And Shylock draws his sword right in the court. And then she calls out, stop, but without a drop of a Christian blood. And he's checkmated. He's checkmated. We don't have a Portia in Washington or in London to checkmate the new Irish. I will say this one other thought before I lose it, Don. In Profiles of Courage, Kennedy's fantastic book, Now I cannot remember all the 8 or 10 people in that list, but in that list there is one who is, might say, the last member of the Profile of Courage among the senators and the congressmen, and that is Robert A. Taft.
Yes.
Son of a president, who puts his own position on the line. He is the what do you call, the senior member, the sitting member, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee.
Yeah.
He should have been the majority leader, but he chose to be that. And this is at the time of the Nuremberg trial. And
Yes.
he stands up and denounces the Nuremberg trial
Yes. Yeah.
because it is a trial based upon ex post facto law. And that is the ninth, article in the in the Constitution, in Article 1, Section 9. There will be no ex post facto laws,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
and he basically, puts his position on the line in defense of the Constitution, and so he won't be the candidate in the 1948 election where he could
right.
have won against Truman.
Absolutely. Well, I wrote a lot about Taft and crimes and cover-ups in American politics, 1776, 1963. And see, Salim, you may be the most educated guy I've ever met. You really have an incredible breadth of knowledge, but most people don't know that John F. Kennedy, again, when he was a senator, he wrote this book, and they just smeared him and said he didn't write it. Ted Sorensen wrote it. His father paid for it, all that nonsense. But Taft, being one of the examples, and what he was considered courageous for, and that was opposing the Nuremberg trials. Now, today, nobody dares do that. In fact, you hear everybody say, we need new Nuremberg trials. No, that was the antithesis of justice. And I wrote about it in that book. And Taft had the courage to come out and say, this is the victors trying the vanquished. It never had been done in the history of warfare, where you legally prosecute the people you beat in war. But this was a war like any others. They had demonized the Nazis to the extent that what happened to the dirty, sneaky, rotten Japs at Pearl Harbor? None the Japanese weren't tried. Why weren't they? Hirohito, well, that guy lived into his 80s. I don't understand. Why was this selective prosecution? But Kennedy himself, on the record, condemned Nuremberg trials. And most people don't know that. And they would look at you like you're crazy. No, look at the record. That's what that was, I think, you're right. That's one of the most, I think, the most important profile and coverage in that book. And you're right. Taft was he was aced out of the 48 convention, and then in 52 he was the favorite as well. But you had then Governor Earl Warren before he became the cover-up artist in the Warren Commission of California, and Eisenhower. They pushed Eisenhower instead, and Taft was considered an isolationist, America First guy. Unlike it was pointed out, yes, I think he was skull and bones. His father definitely was, but he was a great man. Whether he was skull and bones or not, he had a great career, and he would have been I think our world would be completely different if he had become president.
He would have been so much different than George Herbert Walker Bush, who has come out in Epstein file, engaged in cannibalism. And about Kennedy was a Democrat, and he put Robert Taft in that book with amazing presentation. That's through Kennedy that I learned about Robert A. Taft, and then subsequently I read about him, in other works of his.
Kennedy, again, he's why I continue to go back to the Kennedys and how underrated a family they were and how important they were. Kennedy, if you look at Kennedy, was no empty suit as a senator. During his time, he was the only guy I know that was consistently for independence in every nation. He supported African independence. He supported the Palestinian rights way before anybody else did. He stood up for Algerian independence. He was alone in this. And he gets no credit for it, but he wasn't. If you look at the accomplishments of Kennedy time, and I'm thinking more of that. And again, I don't. But with the death of my niece who had Down syndrome, so I point without Eunice Kennedy Shriver, who was JFK's sister, people like my niece and people today that have something wrong with them, they would just be called the R word. They would be looked down on. She, through creation of the Special Olympics, she transformed the way they're looked at by society. And they're considered blessings. They're considered special. That was all her. So I give the Kennedy family credit for that too. I think they're a remarkable family. People can call me fanboys all they want, but that's I think that's historical accuracy.
A lot of people I know think that the Kennedy family, some of the stuff that I read, that they were targeted because of their activism, especially John F. Kennedy. I mean, not only did they kill him, but they went on to through subversion, destroy family members through addiction and stuff, getting into their heads and stuff like that, doing some MK Ultra stuff on them. The Chappaquiddick thing, somebody pointed out that maybe the story that we're told of the Chappaquiddick thing was a setup to make Ted Kennedy look bad, and that he couldn't say anything.
If you read what I've written about it, I've thought Ted Kennedy wasn't in the car. That was just political. He didn't find out about it. They have witnesses. The next morning, he's standing on a yacht, calmly talking to these other rich guys, and his cousin, who later wrote a book years later, and threw him under the bus and tried to make himself out look a hero. Him and this other guy ran up to him and whispered something to him. Kennedy turned white as a sheet and ran off. That was when he was told, "Hey, your car's at the bottom of the pond and a dead girl's in it." I mean, what was he? And he wasn't as bright as his brothers. He wasn't JFK or RFK. And he either made that ridiculous story up himself, or they told him, "This is your story." But there's three ways to look at that. We've only been given two. One is this guy was a murderer. He probably got her pregnant. He killed her, and the record shows Ted Kennedy was a glad-handing, typical old Irish politician. I don't think he could have murdered anybody. Well, he had a good reputation with people. I don't think he was a bad guy. He liked to party too much, a womanizer, but I don't think he would have done that. And the other one is that the Democrats just said, "Don't talk about it." Yeah, his story might not make too much sense, but he did. His story makes no sense. So I think the third alternative is, like I said, they decided not to shoot him, and it also took place, if you remember, RB, Chappaquiddick took place right as man was supposedly landing on the moon for the first time.
Correct.
The story got lost in the shuffle. Very nice timing for that.
Yeah, I think they do that to a lot of politicians. They get some kind of compliment on them, or they arrange something that makes them look bad, and they have that hanging over their heads the rest of their lives, and they have to kind of do what they're told. I mean, you can see that quite a lot in the Epstein files, right?
Yeah. So what do we think of? It looked like these things kind of slow down. You have I guess it's been how long has it been since they kidnapped the president of Venezuela, and it looked like, okay, we're gonna go in, maybe there's going to be a war there, but that's kind of cooled down now. It doesn't seem to be too much going on there. Iran is always a threat. Well, he's going to bomb it, and Trump seems to have backed off. I mean, does he have the power to back off, or I don't think his handlers would let him in. What do you think's going on there?
Well, I'll let you know. So as far as Venezuela goes, the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, has taken over, and she's made a deal with the Trump administration that they can go in and kind of take over the oil sector, try to get it up and running again to the point where it was before. Maduro, I think the Venezuelan government didn't like Maduro because he was making them look bad, and he was doing negotiations with other countries behind the government's back. Delcy Rodriguez wants to keep the Chavista movement alive, and she thought with an idiot like Maduro in charge, it was actually putting it all at risk, and that there's no way the Americans are going to try to invade Venezuela because it'll just be another Vietnam, because there's huge support for the Chavista movement amongst people, and they just won't take it. They just won't take it sitting down. There will be they fight, and they're well armed. In Venezuela, they have their own Second Amendment. Everybody's got a gun. As far as the Iran thing goes, what I heard was that Israelis don't want the United States to go in there and start bombing, because guess what? The Iranians have a deal with the Russians and the Chinese, who have been sending arms and munitions in. The Iranians have the latest anti-aircraft missiles, that the best anti-aircraft batteries that Russia has. Iran has them. So if anything kicks off, Tel Aviv is in direct line. The Iranians remember the 12-day war. The reason it ended after 12 days is because Israel was getting hammered. That was all covered up in the Western press. But I got this through. I watched the Duran, of course. The two Alexes always talk about it. I watch a lot of Press TV and I read Israeli newspapers, and they were talking about talking about it more than the Western press does, that Israel was getting hammered. The Iranian missiles were getting through that Golden Dome, and they weren't even the best Iranian missiles. They were just throwing their chuds at them. They were throwing the SV-340 Russian anti-aircraft systems at them. There is some talk that Iran made a deal with Russia, and they got some Oreshniks. They have 2 or 3 Oreshniks, and Oreshniks are those supersonic missiles that have no defense. The Patriot missile defense system has no defense against the Oreshniks. They go right through them. So I think what might be happening is that Israel is not in position to take the shellacking. What Israel would like America to do is go in there and just totally wipe everybody out as far as the power structure goes, and that there be nobody. I found out that the more Iranian power structure people they kill, they just have more to put in, and it's not going to work. You can't kill them all off. So I'm pretty sure that the Israelis themselves aren't ready for a full-out war in the Middle East because they'll lose. The Russians and the Chinese have Iran's back. People have to understand that this is not going to be the only way they can do a regime change in Iran is from within. They tried that during the so-called protests when the Mossad went in there and they instigated that all. They brought in Kurdish militia over the border. They thought they could do it that way and take over the government from the inside. They probably have some turncoats in the government that were ready to do it, but it didn't work because the Russians came in and they, with some technology that blocked the satellites that Elon Musk, that Starlink satellite. Starlink was how all these protests, these Mossad-linked protesters inside Iran were all communicating through Starlink, and the Russians brought in some jamming technology, so they couldn't meet up anymore and coordinate their actions. And so the Iranian regime just basically stamped them out, and it's over with now. It's not going to work, and overtly going in and just trying to bomb them into submission will not work because the Iranians will fight back. And if you've seen the Iranian professor who's often on the Duran, he's Sabs has interviewed him, and he's been on he's been on George Galloway a lot. He says there's the vast majority of the people in Iran support the government, and there's no way that they will just sit back and let their regime change without them putting up a stink. And they have a well-funded, they have a big army. It's a huge country with jungle, with mountainous areas for people to go hide in and stuff like that. It's not some cakewalk. It'd be Iraq times 10. It'd be Afghanistan times 20, and Venezuela would be Vietnam again. So all these plans and all these great laid plans of mice and men, as they often go awry, and I think that's what's going on. The will might be there, but there's just no way they can do it logistically. I don't think so.
What do you think, Salim?
Well, one of the things that has come out in the context of the Epstein file, I read an FBI report that was released that there is now no doubt about, I'm paraphrasing it, there's no doubt about the man who is behind Donald Trump. Donald Trump is basically the front man. It is Jared Kushner. And it is Jared Kushner who's running the government. Now, if that is the case, then it is no different than, again, historically, what has happened in the instance of Woodrow Wilson. It was Colonel House who was running his administration. In the case of Franklin Roosevelt, it was Harry Hopkins who was his man until, Harry Hopkins was removed in late 1944. The issue was that he was suffering from some fatal disease which took him away in 46, I believe. So it is not what Trump, beside making a lot of noise and behaving like the narcissist bull that he is making decision. And I think all of what RB is saying, and I think what I've been hearing and reading, is that in Venezuela, the kidnapping of Maduro left the Americans with an elephant, a pink elephant, that they don't know what to do with it. And now they're trying from back channel sources to get the Chinese back, to take the Venezuelan oil and not to abandon their several $billion investment in refining Venezuelan oil. That might also be the story at play in Panama, where the Chinese were pushed out, or at least the ownership of the Panama Canal, the port Panama Canal, run by a Hong Kong entrepreneur, was taken out, and the contract uh, basically voided. And now they're stuck with that too. So coming back to, if these are the prima facie evidence, coming back to it, America is overextended with its own supply chain lines, in great trouble, especially when it comes to military equipment. They've run down their inventories. They do not have the capacity to wage the amount of intervention that they're involved in, with possibility of those intervention really blowing up in their face, particularly in Iran and on Taiwan. There are two genocides taking place, and nobody is talking about the interconnection of the two genocide. One is in Gaza, Palestine, and the other is in Ukraine. Um, so it is overextended. Um, the Israelis are overextended. This whole business of Lebensraum uh, is going to backfire, is backfiring. That is the greater Israel story. But the problem is that both Bibi Netanyahu and whoever is the man behind Trump, Jared Kushner, they are, as in the famous limerick, riding the tiger, but they don't know how to get down from it. That's the long and the short of it. We can spin all the various arguments, and I don't think the Pentagon, I mean, whoever is really the brain and the voices in the Pentagon on substantive issue, we see the echoes of that in the voices of people like Colonel McGregor, Colonel Wilkerson, and others, are putting the caution on the White House that we cannot do what you want us to do. We don't have the capacity to do that. I mean, the example of that is at play is Yemen. I mean, two aircraft carrier in the Red Sea had to be pulled out because they couldn't stick around there with the Houthi and the Ansarullah hammering away, with their drones and with whatever missiles they had, and the Americans had to retreat. And in the Arabian Sea, in the Gulf of Oman, I believe they have retreated to be out of the range from the Iranian missiles. So I don't think, unless Bibi Netanyahu's desperation, because he needs the war just to keep going, pushes the White House through Jared Kushner and company to strike at Iran. But the election is coming close. The summer will be on. People will be focused on the midterm. And if Iran is struck, if Hormuz gets closed, if oil prices shoots up to $200 a barrel, then whatever remain of Trump is totally cooked. That's my long and the short take on this matter.
Robin Lee wants to know why do you say that Jared Kushner is running the country? Trump is his puppet. I think most of us got the impression that Kushner was running things in his first administration. He's kind of a low key. You think he's still running things though?
Well, this is what I read, the FBI report. It was one of the counterintelligence field officer. I don't have that report right in my hand, but I have printed it out. It's somewhere in my file.
Kushner's Chad Lubitowicz, isn't he, RB?
Yeah, but I don't think Kushner's running things. I think the people that are behind Kushner are running things. Kushner's just the face of it. Yeah, he's just the face of it. He's just repeating the orders he's been told.
Jared Kushner is all in the family, I mean, and so
that's right.
You have mentioned the Shabbat Lubavitch, I mean, all of these people, I mean, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Scott, Susan Wiles, the chief of staff, Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff.
Mhm.
These guys and the woman Susan Wiles.
A lot
They're
of
all,
non-Irish in there.
pardon.
A lot of non-Irish in there.
There are a lot of non-Irish in there, and deep inside that rabbit hole of Shaba Lubavitch. So yes, I mean I agree with you. In effect, Trump is not running the show. That's the point.
Well, it's so sad that we've because all we've talked about is foreign policy. We haven't. I mean, RB touched on the ICE thing. The only domestic issue really that is getting any attention now is ICE and what's happening in Minneapolis and elsewhere. But everything else is lost in the shuffle. And I think I'm the only one still talking about Doge, and it just makes me weep. That was such a great idea. It had such promise, and I wanted that $5,000 Doge check, and it's just gone, and no one cares. If you say no, well, Doge doesn't exist anymore. Well, what happened? They audited, probably not even fully, one agency, USAID. Nothing else. They were supposed to audit the Pentagon, CIA, hopefully Federal Reserve, all that. Nothing like that, and they didn't. So why Trump has gone completely in the other direction, where everything is foreign policy now. And in that respect, he's like most of the presidents, where they ignore domestic policy and everything is foreign policy. So the people sit around and they look at the infrastructure that hasn't been updated for 60 years. And, in my area, I live, the DC suburbs. We've gone through this is geoengineering. I don't care what anybody says. I've never seen a cold spell like this. It's ridiculous. So this snow we had won't melt. I mean, it's rock solid ice. And we may get more, but I'm amazed the power hasn't gone out yet, because our power grids are terrible. Even here in a rich county, I live in one of the wealthiest counties. The streets they did such a terrible job, and you Canadians would know this better. I can't tell you how badly they plowed the roads. They just give up. They close highways. They don't clear lanes. The schools are opening back up, and like in DC, the DC public schools are opening up, and the sidewalks haven't been cleared. And they're sending these kids around on ice, and nobody cares, because we're distracted by, the foreign policy stuff. We need to clean up this country. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I just wanted to say I watched on Sabby Sab last night. She interviewed Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, the GHF whistleblower. Remember the guy who was over at the global, they were doing the feeding stations for the Palestinians, and he blew the whistle on how badly they were being treated. Well, he's running for the Green Party, I guess now, and he is coming right out and saying that he said, I'm just paraphrasing. Imagine all the money that we send in foreign aid to Israel, all these other countries, the war in Ukraine. 1% of that money spent on the infrastructure in the United States would solve all the infrastructure problems. Just 1% of the trillions they send overseas. That's what it really boils down to. Who do you really? If Trump is such America first, all these candidates with MAGA people are talking about America first. Why don't they actually concentrate on America first and start cleaning up your infrastructure, repairing the bridges, repairing the highways, developing your own super bullet trains, like in China. I have a friend right now, Russell Dobular from Two Dissidents, Keaton Weiss and Russell Dobular. Russell Dobular is over in the Far East traveling, and he says when you're in China, it's like you're living in a world of science fiction. Everything runs better there. They got bullet trains. They got all this great infrastructure, all this, just built out to the skies. And he says, and it's really weird. The Chinese people seem to have more freedom and have more opportunity. They have a widening and they have a widening and emerging middle class that has a lot of economic power. And he says it's like the United States is now the third world country.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the impression I get too. Lots of my subscribers on Substack who have been to China or live in China, I've never heard one bad thing about living in China. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on this? Salim, you're the world expert. What are your thoughts here?
My thoughts are, what was the name of the guy? Walter Cronkite. When the president lost Walter Cronkite, the war was over and his
Yeah.
presidency was over, LBJ. Now, Donald Trump has lost Joe Rogan. Will the same thing happen? Whether it is foreign policy or domestic policy, it was Lord Acton, I believe, who said that in a democracy, we do not have statesmen, we have politicians. So this is where we have come to in democracy. I mean, it is no longer a republic. A republic would be concerned primarily about its own people, not to impoverish them, not to sell them down the river. It is a custodianship. It is something that you take responsibility for. By the way, the idea of custodianship is completely one that explains the Iranian constitution. It in Iranian term, it is vilayat faqih. In other words, it is a custodianship or guardianship of the jurist, that is the clerics. All the other symbols of the constitutional government, that is the republic, the president, the prime minister, the elected members of the assembly, the assembly of experts, and so on and so forth, is a division of power, just like in the American Constitution, the division of power. But what holds all of this together is the supreme leader, which is, in this case, Ayatollah Khamenei, who's the successor to Ayatollah Khomeini, and Khamenei has designated his successor. So that is the custodian of the people. And the concept is genuinely correct, because as Lord Acton says, in a democracy which becomes populist and mob, there is nothing but politicians running around. There is nobody that looks at the overall picture, who can speak truth to power, even if he's holding power, to bring back the people into responsibility and accountability. So this is what has happened to America, sadly. The other day I heard Chas Freeman, the great ambassador who accompanied Nixon as his translator to China in 1972, and who served as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for international politics and economics. He said, we've had a very good run for 250 years, but that is probably over. Talking about ICE and talking about the attacks taking place in Minneapolis and so on and so forth. And in a nutshell, what has happened, the Great Republic has been totally Israelized. The rest of the people are Palestinians, who can be shot with impunity, who can be arrested with impunity, whose houses can be searched with impunity, and there is no accountability. There's no law.
Absolutely. Well, somebody on here talked about China having, again, being first world and us third. I think it was ironic when Donald Trump talked about shithole countries, and this I think we, especially because we don't have any excuse. Those little countries don't have the wealth we have, or certainly don't have we have so much wealth than the world's ever seen before, and it's distributed so poorly that half our country has nothing, and we don't. We literally, the roof is caving in, water's leaking everywhere, and we just ignore it. We literally, let's go out to the neighborhood and let's go help their rooms. I mean, this is insane. The charity begins at home thing is so ignored, and nobody, the American people, don't. I don't know about you guys in Canada, but my last two power bills, electric bills here, are the highest they've ever been by far. And I understand that's happening everywhere. And these are the kind of things this is what matters to people. And they're not being talked about. Why do they care about some ballroom or this, Venezuela or any of these countries?
These are all deflection, Don, isn't it? It is deflection. Yes. Because if back to China question that you asked, I was going roundabout. The Chinese government It's still technically a communist government, the frame. But it is a communist government with Chinese script. That's what Deng Xiaoping talked about, Marxism, Leninism with Chinese script. In other words, it is Chinese culture they have backed into. Mao Zedong said, before he died, he said it will take 15 5-year plans. And in 15 5-year plans, we are going to overtake America. So 5-year plan was designed and implemented from the top down. And here we are. It is this year, January of 2026, was the 15th 5-year plan published. Okay. And it's already, if it is not taken over America, it is equaled America in many ways. We, on the other hand, and I, again, will do my mea culpa, on the other hand, have been talking as brain dead people, Adam Smith, laissez-faire. Where is the laissez-faire? Where is the free market? Tell me. But that's what we teach in our university. We are free market, we are free economy. Every individual, is protected by the First Amendment. But when you go into the granular, there's nothing of that. It is simply a Hobbesian world, nasty, brutish, and short. That's what you're talking about, Don. It is nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah.
It is not Adam Smith's laissez-faire. Because Adam Smith's laissez-faire would depend upon a citizenry that is responsible, knowledgeable, reflective, accountable. It is what Benjamin Franklin said: we have made a republic if you can keep it. But if the citizenry forgets First Amendment after Donald Trump has come into power, and then the Second Amendment, when they are sworn to it, we will have our gun, this is our right to bear arms. This is what distinguishes us from the Chinese or from the Russian or whoever, and the first distinguishes us from the rest of the world. This is the age of Enlightenment's idea that we are implementing. But when you go into it, where is it? You can buy all the Husker magazines. You talk about the non-Irish. So the substance has been gone. And so Just Napolitano recently wrote his op-ed called "Where is Our Constitution?" It's gone. He says it is only, a concept now. It is not functional. And this is the problem. So the remedy, I keep coming back to the whole question: how will and where is the remedy? I am reminded of the movies of Clint Eastwood. I love Clint Eastwood, and occasionally I still go back and see his old movies, just the pleasure of watching him. And you talk about Lincoln and the destruction that he wrought, and I was being reminded as you were speaking about the outlaw Josie Wales.
Yes.
This is what has happened. That is America we are talking about, has become a lawless place. And to the survival, a Josie Wales can survive only by, his wit and his gun.
Yeah, it's well, again, the people are historically literate. I'm trying to do what I can with my little hidden history books. Who's reading them? But I know it's a big task. RB, out there on the road in your truck, running a courageous living, the Canadian government trying to get it down. Give us, we don't have many minutes left here. Anything we missed that you want to discuss?
I think I'm.
Oh, so we could go on and on for another couple hours with the stuff that's in the Epstein files. We only scratched the surface. We didn't even talk about Ghislaine Maxwell and her associations with the British power structure, and how she's sitting in Club Fed, where she has the run of the prison, and the warden is her does all the running around for her. I mean, she's sitting like a queen in Club Fed. And when you ask Donald Trump about Ghislaine, he goes, "Oh, I hope she does well. I don't want to say anything too bad about Ghislaine," because everybody wants to know something. Ghislaine Maxwell was Epstein's handler, right?
Yeah.
So think about that, because she took over the reins from her father, Robert Maxwell, who came to an untimely end on his yacht. And shortly after his death, he got a memorial in Israel, because he was not only working for the MI6, he was not only working with the KGB, he was not only working with the CIA, but he was the Mossad's #1 man. And they had a huge memorial service for Robert Maxwell, and he has a tomb in Israel to this day that is, well, every day freshly flowered, because that's how that's how Israel controls everything. It's through, as Professor Zhang put it, the best intelligence service ever put together in the history of mankind, which is Mossad, which has tendrils in every Western intelligence operation. In fact, Lawrence Robertson was once talking about Donald Rumsfeld after 9/11, and Rumsfeld was complaining that the Mossad had more run of the Pentagon than he did. They didn't need to show credentials; they just walked in and started telling everybody what to do. So that was back after 9/11. That was in 2002. So you can just imagine what's going on now. We are in the firm realm of the Zog, the Zionist occupied government. It was once a crazy theory, but now is showing itself in all its ugliness right out in the open. And people have to come to terms with that. That's what's happening. It's the truth. Now, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, that's the big point. What are you going to do? But give out your because people can help RB if you want to help him. That would be great. He's being fined some absurd amount there in Canada just because he took place in the courageous Canadian trucker convoy, which was a wonderful thing, inspired the world, and they're trying to make him pay. How can people help you, RB?
Well, they can go to www.givesendgo/RBHAM, all in capital letters. www.givesendgo.com/RBHAM, and donate what you can. Every little bit helps keep the wolf away from the door, because after what the government did to me, I can't get any more. I can't get any loans anymore. I was working as a school custodian at the time, and I got fired from my job because my union threw me under the bus. They wouldn't back me up in my assertion that my freedom of speech meant more than. I went to a rally against their wishes because they didn't want a member of their union being out in the public talking about the absolute not unscientific and draconian laws and mandates and restrictions that they were doing through the COVID tyranny. I made my feelings known, and I got fired for it. So my pension was, I lost my pension. I lost my job. I had to go back to truck driving, which is what I do to keep the lights on. But like I said, I can't get any loans, and every year Every year when it comes to income tax time, all my income tax goes towards paying the fines. It's tough. So any little bit helps, and that's great. And you can also support me by every Saturday night tuning into Beyond the Pale on Rumble, exclusively on Rumble. Beyond the Pale, RBHAM Beyond the Pale. Tomorrow night, Donald Jeffries and Colleen Rowley are going to be appearing to be talking more about Wag of the Zog, is the way I'm going to title the show. And I was going to ask Salim, are you available for tomorrow night too?
I'm sorry, RB. I wish I could be, but I have family commitments.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. We got Donald and Colleen Rowley, and Colleen Rowley is very famous. She was on the. She was one of the 3 whistleblowers for the 9/11 whistle.
That's 8 p.m. tomorrow night on Rumble on Beyond the Pale is the channel, RBHAM's channel. You can watch the live stream there. We'll have. I'm sure RB will put up a link, and I'll share it on social media. Salim, closing thoughts and anything you want to promote.
My closing thought was to remind RB, don't forget the royal family, you know.
All right. Yeah.
Wanting to marry me, Epstein.
Yeah. Or how about the precious royal family that kept Jimmy Savile as the King Charles, or then Prince Charles. Jimmy Savile was him and Diana's marriage counselor.
I'm sure you saw there's a count in here. Prince Andrew is in the middle of all this. torturing
Oh,
a young
yeah.
girl and then supposedly murdering her. This is incredible stuff. But I'm sorry, Salim, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But what else you want to close with?
No, you were not interrupting me. You know, I mean, we are in a situation where we are all holding back to see when will the shoe drop, if ever it will drop. You know, and then that we can see and have a talk about it. Other than that, it is the American people are sleeping. We'll see whether they're going to act in November election or they will keep on sleeping.
Yeah, well, I'd like to have confidence, but unfortunately,
Yeah,
I
it's the
don't.
problem
You
with
guys, go ahead.
I said the problem with the elections so much is that the Zionist occupied government, the Zog, owns both parties. That's the problem.
Yeah, they're
And a
not
very
giving
precious few outside of Thomas Massey. Yeah, outside of Thomas Massey or maybe Ro Khanna on the Democrat side, there's all the rest are compromised. So I don't know what you guys going to do.
Yeah.
You have to get rid of the political parties. That's all you have to do.
As they say, we're not going to be able to vote ourselves out of this mess. I don't know what the answer is other than just to keep trying to expose it, because at this point with the Epstein files, these just what we're seeing so far, and there are millions more to go. I mean, the exposure of what kind of personalities these people are. I mean, these are Satanists. Some of the stuff I mean, saying I give you, and some unknown guy tells Epstein, I give you permission to kill him. He lied to you and he lied to me. It's like, what? And we don't know who the guy said. Who's Epstein that gave him permission to do that? We don't know because it's redacted out. Things, allegations of allegations of the same yacht that George H.W. Bush was on, raping boys, that they were dismembering babies and eating the intestines, and just horrible stuff that we can't even imagine. And we're talking about the mouth sores on Epstein and Bill Clinton, both apparently special mouth sores that indicate cannibalism. This is, something even beyond the wildest dreams of any conspiracy theorist. So it's definitely interesting reading, but I don't know where it goes for it. But if nothing, again, and I don't think anything will be done about it. I think at this point they're just releasing everything and maybe letting everybody know, yeah, this is the kind of people that rule you, and what are you going to do about it? Because that's the point. Because it doesn't look like anything's going to be happening, but we'll see. But anyhow, we're over time, and I have great respect for both of you guys, as you know. Salim Mansour, like I said, I think you're I'm gonna start calling you professor, because you deserve the title more than anybody I know, because you are just you have a breadth of knowledge that I can't even comprehend. RB Ham is just so courageous there behind the wheel, doing a show as he's driving a truck, and it's just incredible, because of the way Canada treated him up there. But not that it wouldn't happen here. Anyhow, thanks so much to both of you. I appreciate it, and admiration goes out there. Thanks to everyone in the chat room. And we'll see you next week, same time on iProtest. Take care.
Thank you, Doc.
God bless you all.
God bless you.
God bless us all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.